everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, Rob. It's Diana.
And it's me. High up on a hill, it's Jackie.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. I don't know.
Had lots of gummy bears.
You might not have heard this at home because it's not going to make it into the final recording, but I, as the host of this show about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research discussion, was getting a lot of guff before the taping started.
So true.
A lot of guff for a topic, Jackie, that you were gung-ho to do, and I have been sick all week. Diana has been kind of sick. There's been sickness in this household. It was the week Jackie took off and wasn't living in our house, so she did not get sick.
I did not get sick.
She dodged it. She was on vacation from our house.
I actually told Diana not to come to work. I was like, even if you're kind of feeling better, no.
I was too weak, and Jackie hijacked the topics and said, we're doing... Jackie, what topic are we doing?
Visual inspection.
Visual inspection, which, again, maybe I was delirious when you suggested this, but sounded like such a fun idea.
It is fun.
It's going to be about, like, detectives. Like spying.
No, Diana, I wasn't that
Fingerprint
delirious.
kits,
I
evidence.
still knew that visual inspection referred to the process of reviewing data from our single case research designs to determine experimental effects. However,
I thought it was what everyone thinks behavior analysis is.
Oh, like actually analyzing, this behavior DNA looks
right.
like it's no. I knew what it would be. And I thought, what a fun, it's a fun review topic, and we'll sort of hone our skills in inspection. But boy, in reading about visual inspection, it went a little more into the weeds than I think I'd thought about. And while that is a positive thing, we always want to grow as professionals, it did leave me feeling a little dumb. And then when I feel dumb, I want to crawl up in a ball, and I don't want to talk about it no more. But that's not
very smart.
Oh no, thank you. You don't have to patronize me. No, I understand. So, visual inspection. So, what I thought made sense for this episode, because it made me feel so bad about myself, is that I will say a few more words here, and then I will let you guys talk smartly. And then I will talk about the article that I did the most research into and review of. And then when I'm not talking, I will hide under the table and let you guys just, be smart for the audience at home.
You also are smart.
Possibly not on this topic. We'll see.
None of us are super smart on this topic.
Spoiler alert, the article about like how to use a checklist for looking at articles, there was one of the articles, I totally agree with the checklist. The other one, I said, I think this one looks great. And then when I read their details, I looked through and I said, yes, no, I understand exactly why they got to their results, but I felt kind of stupid.
All right. Well, you're getting ahead of yourself.
I know.
Let's
That's why I said spoiler.
Mm.
It's a spoiler alert. So people wanted to cover their ears really quickly.
I don't think anyone should be worried because we're going to spend some time explaining what's going on here when we talk about visual inspection of data.
It might be my weakened state.
I know.
The virus.
You're just finally
in
upright.
my fever. I'm crawling out of bed to get to the microphone. Pardon my hacky cough that I'm sure will be sprinkled throughout the episode like so many secret code words. Secret code word is not hacky cough.
Don't be confused. Rob, what articles are we reading today?
Oh, thank you for getting me back on track. We'll be reading 3 articles today. The first is Database Decision Making, The Impact of Data, Variability, Training, and Context by Vanselow, Thompson, and Karsina from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, 2011.
A vintage year.
And I chose that one because it's got friend of the show, Nick Vanslow's fun technology corner, which is one of my favorites. I love when he puts those in his articles. Then we'll also be talking about using dual criteria methods to supplement visual inspection, replication, and extension by Falligant, McNulty, Hausman, and Rooker. And that was in Java 2019. So that's an online only at the moment.
Does anyone else, when you hear replication and extension, picture like a little fighter guy who suddenly morphs into twin fighter guys and then extends his arm? It's like, Pchow!
Nope.
Replication and extension.
Nobody does. Nope, just you. That's your thing.
I just watched Scott Pilgrim.
I don't.
think that might be why.
Oh, okay. And then we'll also be discussing systematic protocols for the visual analysis of single case research data by Wolfe, Barton, and Meadan from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2019.
We're up to the minute on these last 2.
Up to the minute? Oh, no. And Katie Wolfe, your article made me feel like a dum-dum. So, watch out! We get vengeance. No, I'm joking. It was a very good article. Just made me feel a little... I've had a fever, and it is very
Rob.
hard.
Okay.
Rob.
All right. Anyway, why don't we start? But I'm adding some spice to the episode. That's my thing.
Actually, that's my thing.
Oh, sorry. You know, Jackie.
It's not my thing, guys.
We all fear change, but it's okay. So first, let's talk just generally about visual inspection, because I think visual inspection is something that all of us as behavior analysts do, whether we are researchers, whether we are practitioners, whether we are students. We are constantly looking at visual data and making judgments about their effectiveness, whether we are going to implement a treatment, whether it's to verify the results that someone else got in their own research, whether it's to talk about the effectiveness of a treatment or ineffectiveness of a treatment that we may have put in place for a client. But it is probably a skill that we all learn to do, and then we do good enough at, that we don't necessarily think about in as much detail as perhaps we should every day. Because, again, it's something that we do frequently enough. There's a level of fluency and a level of comfort I think we all gain. But why don't we talk about sort of the pros and then possibly some of the cons of visual inspections?
Sure. Well, really, if we're talking about visual inspection of data, we kind of need to back it up before that and talk about why we do visual inspection of data. And the reason why we do visual inspection of data is because we're doing single case design research for the most part here in behavior analysis. So we can make the distinction between what other branches of psychology typically do, which is group-based analyses that rely on statistical measures to determine significance, and what we not always, but often do in behavior analysis, which is single case design. With single case design, there are several different experimental designs that one might use, right? So there's the reversal design,
withdrawal, multiple baseline, alternating treatment, also known as multi-element,
changing criterion.
Mm-hmm. All those.
Which I call the duck-billed platypus of designs.
Oh, I like that.
Rarely seen in the wild, but very exciting when you do come across one.
The changing criterion?
Yeah.
Hey, when you think hard enough about it, I feel like half of the treatments that get put in place probably would benefit from a changing criterion design.
Well, it's really very specific in the way in which one should use a changing criterion design. But that's a topic for another day. But all of those are types of single case research designs. And for each of them, there's a way in which we have been taught to determine if the data displayed in those types of figures are actually demonstrating functional control for the independent variables that have been introduced.
And in the articles, they refer to single case design as SCD.
Yep, you see that several times.
And I always forget what that's called, so that's why I'm bringing it up to you guys. I'm like, what is SCD?
Or SCR.
Or SCR.
SCR.
The research.
Right.
Yeah.
So they really mean basically one and the same, right? So there's a couple initial points we want to make sure everyone's familiar with the terminology, right? When we're discussing the data that are displayed in a visual graph, we want to make sure we're using the types of language that are going to help us to determine if those data are experimentally sound when we compare baseline to treatment, etc. So first, we need to be able to talk about the data in terms of the level, the trend, and the variability of the data, right? So the level of the data would be basically the amount, right? Or how high or low that data is being displayed on the y-axis.
How it hangs.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have low level, moderate level, or high level in your behavior. We also need to talk about trend. So you could have behavior that is on an increasing trend, on a
ascending.
Ascending. I know that's what you're supposed to say, but I never say. Decreasing or descending, decelerating trend, or stable, which would be no discernible trend.
When I talk about trends, I like to talk about the trends that are streets ahead and that are streets behind. Usually how I refer to them.
That's fair, right? But it
or
is
last
time.
Season trend, you know, you don't want to be caught with a graph that's last season.
It's really time to retire those Genco genes that you got going on.
Your Genco graph.
And then you also have the variability of the data, which really refers to how far each individual data point is from the mean of that condition within the graph. So you could have low variability in which all points are very close to the mean, moderate variability, or high variability.
Or as I like to call that, very variable.
Very variable. Yes, that's the correct and proper term.
I don't like to call it very variable.
What?
I don't want to tell stories, but I worked with some supervisees who we had a lot of practice on really variable, it's highly variable would be fine. It's like very variable. It's like,
I like that.
You know,
I like it. I mean, it's right.
You know, when you're with your group of friends, I think you say it and it's kind of like, ha, yes, because we know better, but it's not the greatest. But it's funny to say.
Right. Well, there's the way that I just described them are really the ones you want to stick to if you need to describe a graph for someone. in terms of how you're going to visually inspect the data. So level, trend, and variability are always points that we want to be considering. And each of those types of graphs that I discussed already has a particular way in which you're going to determine if the data represented are showing functional control.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Just for definition precision. When we talk about functional control, would that be considered the same as when we're talking about experimental control, or is one referring to the visual output from your experiment, whereas experimental control refers more to the design itself?
Usually they use them interchangeably.
Okay.
But I think when you're talking about experimental control, you're talking about the design too. So you're looking at how the design is demonstrating functional control, right? So people do use them interchangeably though. But remember, when you're looking at experimental control or functional control, you're looking at that only when there's a change in the DV, it's because the IV was implemented,
okay,
right? Even across all of these single subject designs.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. So in determining if we see change due to the introduction of our independent variable, then we're going to use what's referred to as baseline logic in order to make that determination.
Which seems scary for students, but it's not that scary.
Just to reorient, I think the terms you're about to discuss, so referring to baseline logic and sort of everything that comes after it, these are the terms I think the average practitioner, not to prejudge anyone, but probably are not terms that are being used as much of a regular basis. You might be thinking of them, it's a private verbal behavior, but you may not be defining the terms quite this way or discussing your graphs using this terminology as much because it's not necessarily as important to the practice of see this worked or see this didn't work.
Well, it is precisely important.
Oh, no, it certainly is, but I think it's one of those steps of like, step A, I know these things about variability and level. Step B, a bunch of stuff, I remember it.
Underpants.
Step C, results,
Yeah, so it is true that people use the terms of baseline logic less often. And the terms, before I forget to say them, are prediction, verification, and replication, which I will define here for y'all in a second. But it is true that I think when you're just, generally looking at a graph, you use those terms less often, right? When you're attempting to describe it, because it quickly gets very stodgy and in the weeds when you're trying to explain well, this should have happened and that would have been verification, but then this happens, so that was replication. I think that gets a little bit tricky. But when we say, oh, look, we introduced this independent variable and it worked, right? And we saw a behavior change. So this intervention is effective. You can't say that without being able to point to the underlying baseline logic points to confirm that change.
But you don't necessarily need to verbalize the visual inspection, because if you saw it, you might know what about the graph you are stating, functional control. Mm-hmm. But again, the input is more about the visual. The output is effective or not effective.
That's true. And if you've been trained to talk about visual inspection of data, then you should know the terminology of baseline logic. You should be able to talk about your data in terms of level, trend, variability, immediacy of change. And then you should also be able to discuss the changes that you see between conditions or between phases in your graph in terms of baseline logic. So if you've been trained in that, then you may be sort of privately tacting that to yourself, but overtly just saying, look, we saw, the change we wanted to see, so our intervention was effective. Yep. But, really everyone should be referencing back to this if you're ever in question about, did what I do what I thought it should do?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good time for a review. So let's go through those terms.
Right. So the way that I always remember these, I talk about them in prediction, verification, and replication. And I always remember that they're not in alphabetical order.
No. Nope, they're not.
Which is the best mnemonic that I have for them. So anybody out there, just remember, if you're trying to think, does the R come before the V? No, it does not. It's P, then V, then R. Prediction, verification, and replication.
One of my students thought of something really funny, but I can't remember what it was now. I'm going to have to look back. But that's how they used a mnemonic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was park or something, and I laughed. But obviously that's dumb because I can't remember it.
Not that great a mnemonic, huh?
Not for me, I guess.
All right. Well, think of your own maybe at home and remember them. But just knowing that it's not in alphabetical order, that helps me enough. So the easiest way to visualize baseline logic is with a classic AB withdrawal design. Okay? So let's say that we're looking to have behavior increase in our AB withdrawal design. So we start out with behavior demonstrated at low levels in our initial baseline A condition. So where prediction comes into play is by asking ourselves the question, what if we did absolutely nothing? How would the behavior continue to look? We would predict that behavior would continue at that same low level that it's occurring in that very first A condition of this reversal graph. Okay? So that's our prediction. Next, we're going to drop in our treatment. Ba-boom. It's an amazing treatment. It's DRO.
You know how much I hate the DROs.
I'm just waiting for Jackie to respond.
I just want you to remember prediction, verification, replication. Put them in your mind files. All right.
All right.
If Jackie leaves, we don't have to keep recording.
I'm giving everyone mean stares.
Oh my goodness.
So let's say that we drop in our treatment. This is our B phase now, right? We see an immediate change in the level of responding.
It's your resting B phase?
Yeah, exactly. An immediate change, okay? So that's really important to note, but just because that happened does not yet confirm for us that we have demonstrated experimental control, right? It was very cool. We had a low level of behavior in the A phase, and now we have a high level of behavior in the B phase, and that change in behavior is not what we predicted.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
If we'd done nothing. So we say, aha, maybe the introduction of this independent variable produced this change, but we don't yet know. Because it could also be that that was the moment in time in which the giant asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out all the dinosaurs. And that was actually the reason why we saw change, not because of our DRO.
The immaculate acquisition.
For T-Rex plant eating.
It's never your DRO.
I know. So we just don't know because we haven't done the additional phases that we need to verify when and only when our IV is introduced. Okay? So that's our B phase. So we suspect something has happened, but we cannot confirm yet. So we're going to do two things next. Next, we're in our B phase. We have our treatment. Behaviors occurring at high levels, just like we want. We're going to make another prediction at this point. We're going to say, what if we didn't do anything else ever again? Where would we predict behavior would continue if we kept this intervention in place? Where would we predict it, Rob?
I mean, you predicted at the high level.
High level, right, exactly. Okay, so now we're going to do our second experimental change.
It's coming back to me. It's not like I never learned this before.
We're going to take out our independent variable, go back down to baseline. Our behavior does exactly what we thought it was going to do. It drops back down to that low level that we saw in our first baseline condition. Okay? So imagine, picture your initial baseline and picture that you had predicted that behavior would continue to occur at the same rate. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Now we're back down there. We're back down at the same rate. So you, in your mind's eye, draw yourself a little data path that extends all the way across all of the conditions. Because we took our independent variable out, we're back in baseline. We have behavior occurring at that same low level, verifying our initial prediction. Okay? Without our independent variable in place, behavior stays low. Mm-hmm. So we have another piece of our answer that it probably is that independent variable that we introduced that's produced this change. But we're still not sure. Because now what we need to do is put our independent variable back into place to see if we get the same effect again.
And I think this is where a research paper versus practitioner graph is going to diverge, in that if you are able to demonstrate the prediction and then the verification, you're going to put the treatment back in place and everyone's just going to go home happy. You may not even do the verification because everyone is so happy that there's been a change in level of, skill.
Perhaps.
So I think this is where
like
some
Greg
of those...
Hanley is going to argue that you should go ahead and do that reversal.
Oh, I think ideally you would. However, realistically, you may not have the staff or resources to be doing so many withdrawals, depending on your setting.
It depends, I think, how important is this behavior to get under control.
Yes.
And to know with certainty that the intervention that you have in place is producing the behavior change. So if this is a challenging behavior, then it's going to be quite valid for you to determine that your intervention is effective. Mm-hmm. So you're going to go back to your B phase again, put your intervention back into place, right? And hopefully, at least in our hypothetical graph, we have behavior return back up to those high levels, right? And that's your replication. Boop, boop. Exactly. So its replication is specifically referring to replication of that initial treatment effect.
Right.
All right? we also, because we put our treatment back into place, we now have prediction at that level as well.
It's double prediction.
Right? Yes, we verified
P-squared.
our prediction of our treatment effect while also replicating that treatment effect.
Man, that's amazing.
Okay? So all those pieces are part of baseline logic. There's another term called affirmation of the consequent as well. And that's really related to seeing that initial immediacy of change that we talked about when we first dropped in our intervention. At first, right, we saw a big change in the behavior. So that was an immediate change related to change in the consequent that we saw. So all those pieces taken together are how we walk through the components of baseline logic to determine if the intervention that's in place is indeed producing the effect that we're looking for.
Oh, that was good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I learned a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's all well and good, right? So
Right.
we're behavior analysts. That sounds great. That sounds cool. Wow. How elegant, right? What an elegant, I love it when people write that. What an elegant design.
An elegant design.
You've
An
made.
elegant interpretation of your data.
What we should keep in mind is that people outside of our very small field say, what are you people doing? Right? Why are you looking at data in this way on this extremely small scale? Don't you have questions about how behavior is going to generalize to large groups? Right?
Yeah.
Why are you so interested in the individual? And I do love this about our field because it gets at the very heart of what it means to be an applied behavior analyst. The fact that we do this single case research design. Because that's precisely what we care about, right? Mm-hmm. We are looking to make socially significant change for an individual on the individual level. So,
and then replicate it across individuals.
Yeah, exactly. So we do care if our treatments are largely generalizable, right? Mm-hmm. But that's really sort of like a secondary perk. What we mostly want to know is, do we see the change that this individual needed in order to improve their life?
Right.
And we can only determine that by looking at behavior on a single case basis.
But it's not all roses. You know, we've talked about it as being very rosy and through our rose-colored glasses, right? But there has been lots of previous research that suggested that visual inspection has low inter-rater agreement, meaning you would look at a graph and say that there's a functional relation that's been demonstrated, and I would look and there's not. Or poor accuracy, because it is, or it can be, fairly subjective in nature, right? So depending on how much experience you've had with looking at designs or how conservative you are.
Or how you were trained.
Trained you. Right? You may get different results there. So that's...
There potentially is a sensitivity that is going to change how much behavior analysts will agree in their own visual inspection of the same data set.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of problematic.
It's very problematic,
right? Like we're hanging everything. We're like, we have this amazing science that produces effective behavior change. Mm-hmm. Well, who's deciding that it's effective behavior change?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we are. And how are we deciding it? Just by looking at the graph.
And this is true about everything in any science. Like, I mean, even like psychology or economics, when you're looking at like a randomized control trial, as much as those are, considered like the gold standard of research design, you still look at them and say, well, you're losing a lot of the individualization in them. You're using a lot of statistics to sort of wash out some of the extremes of the data. You're looking at these
random p-value.
Yeah, these random p-values, which again, to the average person doesn't necessarily mean anything. You're talking about statistical significance is not the same as this is effective for everybody, or it's just some number of people. So, I mean, you could say this about any type of research design. I think the single case research design being so different than what so many other fields use in their research design is probably one of the reasons that you might get more critiques of this methodology than, say, some of the others. Because every researcher will tell you every research design has inherent flaws. Mm-hmm.
So this actually has happened quite a bit where I have worked in the past where there hasn't been a lot of, I guess, knowledge and teaching on single subject design research. So it's been incredibly difficult to get single subject design research approved through an IRB. It's getting better, right? Through teaching and demonstrating the advantages of single subject design. But I remember one time, a long time ago, I presented a graph of individual data. It was very beautiful graph. There was no one would argue that there was not a functional relationship in this graph, or relation. It's not a relationship, it's a relation in this graph. And the person I was showing it to was like, why have all those lines? Like, where's the numbers?
Give me a good bar graph.
Right? And I was like, oh, okay, this is
Although
where
does
we're
anyone
at.
really love look at my statistical table?
Right.
It's like, ugh, no, thank you.
No,
Yeah.
but a good pie chart.
Right.
You know, I
Pie
think
chart.
the name of it is just so
Delicious.
delicious.
Mm-hmm.
And a bar graph, both.
That's your
And
bar
Nom,
graph,
nom,
yeah.
nom, 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 nom.
Yeah, so another
Look at my chocolate slide single line graph. Nom, 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 with marshmallow fudge.
So another reason that I really wanted to look at this type of research, or this idea, this topic, was because we as behavior analysts are focusing on the individual, but we're also interested in asking larger questions now, right? So, and we need a way to look at a lot of data and make sure that we are using the same analyses for all of the data, so that we don't have to rely on our readers to go through 50 graphs, right? If we're doing research study that asks a larger question that needs more N, right? More people.
Yeah.
And so that's why I really wanted to look into this, because I think our field has started to move in that direction and to kind of test the limits of procedures or phenomenon. Just like that word.
Phenomena.
Right.
Phenomena.
And so how we can use some math to help us, give us a more, I think, more clear and objective way to look across many graphs to make sure we're applying the same thing to all graphs. So that's really what I was excited about for this.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of value in visual inspection. I don't think we need to move
100%.
away from it, but I do think that recognizing as a field that this is ultimately a subjective measure, right? And working as a field as a whole toward a way that we can ensure the integrity of the decision making that's based on single subject design is important.
I think this is kind of another in the long line of the Wild West of ABA has sort of been waning for, quite some time, but is really over. And we do need to be looking at what have we as practitioners just sort of been doing and taking for granted that we're just doing it well, that probably needs to be systematized, written down, and planned for training for the future generations in a way that we just have not been doing before. In terms of that idea of, okay, well, where are we going as the field in terms of either standardizing, or do we need to further prove that visual inspection techniques are as reliable as they need to be? Let's get into our first article. So we've already spoken about how there have been previous articles looking at are our visual inspection methodologies reliable? And the results are very mixed. So rather than just look at previous research, which has sort of looked and gotten mixed results, low reliability, some better reliability in terms of visual inspection, Vanslow and colleagues said, well, why don't we take a look at graphs as practitioners will typically look at graphs, which is point by point. We look at our datum. We look at a datum and we decide from that whether we are ready to make a change in phase.
Hopefully have at least 3 datum.
Yes, you should have at least 3, but are there times you might have less than 3? Let's find out. So this article, the Vanslow article, the database decision-making article, wanted to look at, is reliability related to how behavior analysts look at visual inspection of graphs better than previous research has stated? It's an extension of Austin and Mawhinney from 1999. They also had another article, Mawhinney and Austin, 1999.
They're like, ooh, we can't both, we have to switch it up.
In which they gave subjects a bunch of data. They gave the data point by point and said, all right, what's going on with these graphs? This extension decided to say, well, what if we took data presented point by point to behavior analysts, both experts, practitioners, and novices in the field? Would these respondents choose the same point to implement a treatment? So basically the same thing that Dinah, you were talking about. Would they say this is demonstrating enough data to evaluate the predictiveness of this data set? And then can we do our verification? Can we do our replication? So in this study, we had not just one, but 2 studies. One was looking very specifically at the agreement of how long should baseline go. So again, this is going to be a component of visual inspection. But then also, are there other factors that might impact how behavior analysts choose to present a graph? do we always need, like you said, Diana, we should have at least 3 baseline data points. But are there
data points makes a trend?
Are there contexts in which you might say that's not needed? Right. And is there agreement about what those contexts might be?
Okay.
So I think these are very, very good questions for the average practitioner. And again, since the Nick Vanslow study, it's going to use computers, which is what I love about Nick Vanslow studies.
Lasers.
Lasers. Nick, do some research on lasers, man. If you're listening.
He's not.
So in the first study, we have 3 groups of behavior analysts. There are experts, and these are doctor-level degrees in behavior analysis or related fields. So this is like the Dianas and the Jackies of the world. Well, actually, you guys would count on this in some ways,
no.
too. Also, no, these experts also were current or had been previous associate editors or above in Java.
Oh, no, we're not that level.
That's not us.
So that's not quite you. But I mean, it's pretty close. You've certainly edited for journals.
Yeah, but we're not on the associate editor.
No. But you're like working your way up.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So you're closer to expert than I think the other aspect. There'd be what I call the normies, which are the me's. I'm just a BCBA. I don't have any other credentials.
That's a lot
Well,
of
you still passed the test, and you had a lot of schooling to do so.
I still passed the test. I went to a lot of school. That's true. That's true, folks.
You should not discount
No, I don't discount
the work that people did.
I don't discount that work. That's the work I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of the people who are like me. And then, of course, novices, who were people who were hired recently at a school for children and adults with intellectual impairments, and they were taking an introductory course in behavior analysis. And they just read a chapter on visual inspection in Cooper, Heron, and Heward.
Neat. That was probably the 2007 version, not the 2019 version.
No, that would have been the older version.
So Jackie and I are the only group not represented in this sample.
Yeah. The not quite expert.
You're
right?
sort of in the expert level. I think other studies would have considered you the expert level.
A couple more years, we will be included.
I don't know if Vanslow and colleagues just happen to know enough of these experts hanging around that they could be that specific as to what they were looking for.
I'll write him. Dear Nick.
In any case, you got your 3 groups. And I'm assuming it was Nick who did this in the study. May have been Rachel, may have been Alan. Created a computer program that took data from a variety of studies. I think they had 5 different studies that they took data sets from Java, a previously published data sets, and had a computer program that would just show each point on a graph 1 point at a time.
I love that.
They were given the instruction. They sat down at their computer. They had an email file, so they'd have this file so they could just do it remotely. For all the participants, it would say, continue adding data points to the baseline phase by clicking the continue running current phase button until you have enough data points that you would begin the next phase, e.g. treatment. This is all a quote. If this were an applied research project you were supervising or conducting. So the individual would see the graph. They'd be reminded of that they were in baseline. They get a reminder of the instruction. And once they clicked the button to continue with the current phase or to enter treatment, they would get a little, no, you sure you want to do this? You click yes or no.
Are you sure you want to start treatment?
There would be a note saying what they expected to see. You expect to see improvement. So in study 1, you've got your, the graph the folks would be seeing had this y-axis that had responses per minute or number of correct responses, and the x-axis was session. So a pretty standard graph. You've seen a million of these. And you would either see the data point and you would then click the button, click, continue running current phase, or you click the button, stop baseline and start the intervention. Then you'd click it and then you'd fill out a box answering why you chose to either continue or to stop. And then there'd be a box for comment. So if you just wanted to write anything else. And this was what everybody saw. All the participants saw no matter what group they were in. If you chose to continue the baseline, you would just see another baseline data point and then you would be asked the same questions. If you chose to stop and enter treatment, you would just get your next graph. And there were 5 different graphs that you would see. You do all 5 in that first study. A quick tangent here because I thought this part was pretty cool, even though it is irrelevant for the overall topic today. So please stop me if I go on too long.
Let me stop you right there. Just kidding.
So we have all this data from previously published Java studies that had an ABAB or ABA reversal design with a single path. They tried to choose 5 that had different trends and degrees of variability because I think this is important because if you're asking questions about are our visual inspection methods good enough, you want to be able to demonstrate that they are good or not good enough across a variety of data types and trends. Because again, if every graph just were a straight line, I think we would say, oh yeah, this method works super well because we could always predict exactly what comes next on our straight line.
Is that your Jimmy Stewart voice?
It's, Merry Christmas, ABA Design! Thank you. Which again, that seems pretty simple. You just grab a bunch of data points, you put them in an Excel graph, and you teach an Excel graph. You use it like a macro to say like, show one data point at a time. You have a little box.
Sure.
But what I thought was super cool was the idea of, well, what if people just go for baseline for way longer than was in the original published study, which is a real problem because you're not going to get good results if like, there is no more baseline. Sorry, you should have entered treatment, stupid. Like that's not an option. So they had to generate additional data points beyond what was in the study. So again, they looked at means and they sort of were able to generate, hundreds of points past the baseline. But that just so seems like the kind of clever little thing that you'd put it in your computer generated data points. So they were able to have 300 data points. So if you really were the behavior analyst that wanted to demonstrate like, I have no idea what I'm doing, you'd have a 300 point baseline.
I just want to be sure, okay?
I'm not, just want to be,
just one more.
Variability. They had 300 points. Now, these were all generated. So for each of the 5 graphs, you had 300 points total that you could see. So you could really go a while for this study. But they were the same for all 5 graphs. So it wasn't like it was randomly generating a new number each time. I just thought this was super cool. Then they even gave it to some BCBADs to be like, which of these graphs is a fake graph that was invented from, math and the numbers I had before and which are real graphs that were published. And nobody knew. 3 out of 4 people said like, I can't tell.
That's
one person
awesome.
that I think said they did know was like, I think I know. No, they didn't. It was chance.
I would have loved it if that person, they're like, you know what? I know.
How would you know?
I don't know. You wouldn't.
There are a bunch of points on a
You wouldn't,
on a
but
line.
I love the idea that one person's like, I know.
I know, and they didn't know. So anyway, just a quick tangent there. So going back to study, the dependent measure in the study overall was, okay, what were the number and range of the data points that were added to each graph? So only given the data point by data point by data point, how many points additional to the original research were added in this study? So basically, did people correctly predict when treatment would be able to be implemented? So how stable was the baseline? How, predictive was their line? So researchers looked at the difference from the mean number of data points. So they look at the mean number of data points that were averaged across all the participants for a graph, and they'd subtract it from the total number of data points that were generated by a single participant. So again, this was going to give you some, good information about which of the groups had the most agreement as to this graph is going to have enough data and is stable enough to probably allow for that predictive component of visual analysis. If the results were close to 0, that would indicate, there was a high level of agreement. And then again, the more data points that were added, the less agreement, of course. And you can kind of see it in the graph. If you're looking at the article itself, you have on your x-axis just the number of the different graphs. So from graph 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 from the 5 different studies. And then you have each of the data points. And then you have on the y-axis the amount of that variability, the difference from the mean values. So I think in terms of a pro for visual inspection, was our experts on our graphs that had little variability in the path really generated the exact same graphs that you saw in the research. Maybe like 1 extra point for each other. As there was more variability in the graphs showing point by point, so variability in that baseline, you did start to see more disagreement. Though, was it enough to point to visual inspection not being that effective? You also saw pretty similar results for the BCBAs as well as the experts, which I think also does point to, all right, we've got at least
That's good.
At this point in history, 2011, BCBAs who had been trained and been working in the field for a while are about as good at determining, stability and baseline as experts. So that's pretty good information. When you looked at the novices, that's where you really saw the greatest difference in terms of where treatment would be implemented, which makes sense because, again, they hadn't been given a lot of training in this area. Even with more variability, they didn't see a huge difference in the results. They actually saw closer similarities in terms of when baseline would end and treatment would start with the variability, which was kind of the inverse of what we saw for our experts and our normies, I guess I call them. What they noticed, though, was looking at comments is that there were a lot of common comments. A lot of folks saying, you can't just use one data point. You have to have more than one data point, which, Diana, you've already said many, many times. You need 3 usually for a baseline. But you also saw a lot of comments by experts saying like, well, I might have changed what I did if I actually knew what the treatment was. If it wasn't just sort of this vacuum that I'm responding to, or if I expected to see a strong treatment, or if the topography of the response I was measuring was one in which I needed to see a change quickly due to safety concerns.
That's fair.
Which led to study 2, which was basically the exact same study, except there was more information given. So in study 2, they only used those highly variable graphs, which were graphs 4 and 5, because again, those were the ones that had the greatest difference in responding. So the ones that would be the most interesting in terms of our general questions for today. They gave the different graphs to our participants. They had different inspection sessions using just sort of the pre-generated data. They only used BCBAs who had training in the field, so they used doctoral students in behavior analysis at this point. So closer to the experts than any of the other groups.
Not represented.
No, you're a little beyond what this group was. Now, the difference here was that even though they started with the same basic information, the graphs had fake initials on them, so they looked more like what you'd think of as a treatment graph than a research graph. There was the original no information condition, which was exactly like study 1, where it's just like, hey, click a button to keep going or click a button to stop and do treatment. The expected direction was stated in this condition, so that was a difference. And it was, we expect to see a decrease in the rate of responding.
Well, that's helpful.
Yeah. There was also a condition, so they give another graph in which they said, hey, in this one, we expect that there will be a strong effect on the behavior when this treatment is implemented. And then there was another condition, so they present another graph that said, hey, guess what? You're measuring severe self-injury. And the results here would say, okay, well, is there a difference now in how many points the participants are willing to sort of continue on with before they would, quote unquote, implement their treatment? And here we did actually see that there was a decrease in the number of data points that would be added if there was a strong treatment condition. However, it was when the participants were told, this is SIB, this is severe self-injury, that you would see a decrease in the number of data points in baseline for at least 3 of the 4 graphs that were presented to participants. So it was that info about this is dangerous behavior pretty much that pointed to you would have less sessions, to the point even where there was one saying, hey, I would only need 1 data point here. I only need 1 data point to start, which I think is a fair statement, which I think both is supportive to some extent of visual inspection, but also kind of condemns our visual inspection in that it is very subjective as to how many data points are appropriate in a graph, because there are different variables that will change what the average practitioner, at least in this study, would allow before implementing a treatment.
I think this kind of leads into the future studies that we're looking at, because mine empirically looks at how many data points you should use and how many treatment points you should use in order to demonstrate a real outcome and not a false positive outcome. So I think that lends into our studies really well, Diana.
Yeah. But also, if you just gone and asked all these practitioners, what's the one time that you'd use less than 3 data points in baseline? What would everyone say?
Self-injury.
Yeah,
right?
Self-injury.
Yeah.
Severe self-injury or aggression. It's going to produce potential harm, right? Like, forego your 3 points in baseline. Just get something going.
Yeah.
So maybe that is a quick summary.
So while I think the overall results will point to that there can be a lot of agreement among behavior analysts as to what's appropriate in visual inspection or visual analysis, there are a lot of other factors that can influence this. And while I don't think any of us would disagree that some of those factors make sense, it does also point to the idea that, we do have a technique that probably needs some amount of standardization. So why don't we take a quick break? And when we come back, we will talk about some of the recent efforts to add to that standardization. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking all about visual inspection. But before we do that, I do want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to our episode, you are able to earn learning CEUs. You just need to listen to the episode.
Just one.
You learn one. Yes, one learning CEU. You might learn many facts, but only one learning CEU. And you would go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs, and you'd enter in these 2 secret code words if you're so inclined. That first code word is Beetlejuice. BEETLEJUICE. If you spell it the correct way, which is like GUESE, I would also give you credit.
Oh my God.
No.
But we had an argument about this before the show. I don't know why we still use this as a code word.
I said Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice.
Everyone knows it as Beetlejuice.
Like
Not
the Tim
Beetle,
Burton
guys.
80s movie, Beetlejuice.
Yeah,
Right.
like Michael Keaton.
Yeah,
Yes.
Beetlejuice.
Okay, that's the title of the movie. The
Right.
name of the creature is actually more
Beetlejuice.
Geist, but it's Beetlejuice.
Please feel free to write in.
And tell Rob that he's 100% wrong.
I think I'm 100% right. Beetlejuice. So now that we're back, let's continue on with the journey towards standardization in visual inspection. So I think, Diana, you were going to talk first about the Wolfe article.
I was, but I didn't get to say my joke before, which was, how many data points does it take to get to a treatment condition?
How many?
The world may never
The world
know.
may never know. Remember that?
You totally, okay, wow.
Wait, you were looking at
The
me like
first
you
time.
didn't. Okay.
Wait, are we talking about Tootsie Pops?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That little owl?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Can I take a moment to sing the Tootsie Roll song?
No, we're already running.
Oh,
Roll
fine.
flavor, want my chocolatey
We're- no,
chew.
we're-
All right,
no,
all right.
we're already
Tootsie Roll,
running
I
late.
think I'm in love with you.
All right, Diana, you gotta stop your
All right, so I
song.
reviewed the Wolfe, Barton, and Meadan et al. Study in behavior analysis and practice, and I would like to hand it to these doctors that they did an amazing job with this study. I loved it through and through, and it comes with supplementary materials, which I'm going to direct everyone toward, and I'm going to start using because I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, It was a fun article. I had a lot of fun reading it, and then there were some
fun.
interactive components to it. It was
Right?
very cool.
Yeah. All right. So the points that they make in their intro are things that we've pretty much already discussed, right? So we rely a lot on visual inspection of data in our field. It's appropriate given that we use single case design. However, there's never really a lot of IOA that's conducted when the authors say, yes, we have an effective treatment here. There's no one really backing up whether that's true or not, right? And because of that, we don't really have any formal guidelines for determining if experimental control has been established in the single case design
Yeah, for reals.
form of research. Really not, right?
Yeah.
So we've all been kind of working on the honor system in the, 50-ish years that we've been doing applied behavior analysis. So maybe it's time to develop a little bit more formal ways of determining if effective treatment has been conducted. They also referenced in their intro that some other folks had looked at exactly how people are talking about their data in their research, and they found that many people were actually only discussing their data in terms of medians or averages versus level trend and variability.
I've seen that a lot.
And I do find that a bit disheartening in that we want to do if we're going to rely on visual inspection of data, we want to do a full description of the data analysis through visual inspection terms. They also talk about the What Works Clearinghouse, which is a very cool resource if anyone hasn't visited that site before. They provide a lot of different information regarding empirical science and how one can really use best practice there. So the What Works Clearinghouse lists out 6 characteristics to use when examining single case research, which helps sort of point the authors toward what they're going to end up doing as far as their protocol. And those 6 characteristics were level, trend, variability, immediacy, all of which we've already discussed,
Right.
as well as overlap, so overlapping data points, and then consistency of treatment effect as
Okay.
well. So they describe those in the What Works Clearinghouse, but they don't give an exact protocol for how one might walk through and,
Sure.
base their determination on those 6 characteristics. So that was like their jumping off point. And then additionally, they referenced the Hagopian and colleagues 1997 study, which did pretty much exactly what they're going to do in that they developed a protocol for examining experimental control, but they did it specifically with an alternating treatments design. So it was
I
all
like
these different
that.
characteristics, like, do you see differentiation between the data points? Do you have stability within each experimental design path, etc.? And for the Hagopian study, they looked at expert decision-making using the model that they developed, and then they checked that agreement between other raters and the expert using the protocol. And they found that when they had that protocol in place, the agreement among the raters increased from about 50% of effective versus non-effective to 90%.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so they felt that it was really effective, but they'd only done it for multi-element designs. So the Wolfe and colleagues study wanted to look at developing protocols similar to the Hagopian one, but for reversal designs and multiple baseline designs, which are really the most common, I would say, most commonly used designs in our field. And they took it a step further in that it's now 2019, not 1997 anymore, and they were able to make these web-based resources,
amazing.
Open availability resources, right? So I'm going to give you guys right now the link to these protocols that they developed. They're available for free and they're very cool. And I checked them out and I did them myself. So here it is. Ready? https:// sites.google.com/site SCRVA protocols / Okay?
I'll try to remember to put that in the notes as well.
Yeah. And they're available on there, and they're available for free. You can do the decision tree that they have set up, and then you can also download the protocol for yourself. So
That's
it's
awesome.
an amazing resource, and I most definitely thank Dr. Wolfe and her colleagues for giving us access to this, because it makes what they did in their study just so much more useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think to remember, though, again, this is while based in a lot of research, is still a newer protocol, which only has so much potential generality. So if you're going to, use it, it's not like this has been used multiple times.
Right.
Right.
Which is, like, we're going to discuss some of the pros and cons here. Yeah. But basically what they made is like a decision tree, right?
I
They
love
called
the
it
decision
response guided, which means
Ooh.
that depending on the answer that you put in each step of the way, it's going to give you other
Right.
options. And they have one for a reversal design and then one for multiple baseline design. And it basically breaks it down. Like, do you have 3 data points in your initial baseline?
Right.
Can you make a prediction about how behavior is going to go based on those 3 data points? Then in treatment, do you see an immediate change in behavior? Do you see stable patterns of responding? Can you make an additional prediction, right? All the way down the line. And then for the multiple baseline, there's an additional component there of in the legs of treatment that haven't yet received the intervention, did baseline behavior remain the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the really cool thing about this and the fact that it's online makes this possible is that as you select yes or no for each of these criterion, it gives a weighted score to each of them, right? So some of them are worth more than others as far as determining effectiveness.
Sure.
And then for the multiple baseline, if the lower tiers of your MBL didn't hold at baseline level, then you get a negative score
Uh-oh.
for that, right?
That makes you sad a little bit, but I understand that.
Yes, but that's like how it works, right? And let me state that it's an arbitrarily assigned numeric value, right? On an arbitrarily assigned score of 0 to 5.
Yep.
And they decided that a 3, getting a score of 3, would indicate empirical effective control.
Okay.
Experimental control. There
Yes.
we go. Phew, too many E words floating around. So that's very cool, right? The way that they did it. I tried it out for both of the examples that they did in their study. And I got within about 0.25 on my scores compared to what they did.
You did.
So for the reversal design, they scored it as a 2.75 and I scored it as a 2.5. So neither of us thought that it demonstrated experimental control. And then for the multiple baseline design, they scored it as a 2.66 and I scored it as a 2.89, right? So both of these were pretty complex graphs and they chose them for that reason, right? So
Which is good because you probably would have high inter-rater variability if they were easy.
You'd think so, but that's actually another point that they do bring up later on in the study. So let me tell you a little bit about what they did because they didn't just rely on me.
They were like, "Dear Diana, please read our article after it's published."
Right? Tell me how we did. Right. So what they did was actually kind of cool. So they did all of the research related to the study during a conference.
Wow.
I know. So they
way to use their time wisely.
For real, right? So they had 16 participants. They were at an early childhood special education conference. And I guess they asked their audience, like, hey, will you guys be in this study while we talk to you about, the thing that we've created? And everyone said yes. So they actually had 9 PhD level faculty and 7 master's level people who said that they were students, which kind of made me wonder, were they doctoral students? In which case, I wish they had said they were doctoral students, because that's like...
Or maybe they were students in behavior
but
analysis, but had a master's degree in special ed.
That could be.
Right?
They didn't say if people were BCBAs.
Right.
But everyone had a pretty high level of training.
Sure. Somewhere.
But not necessarily specific to visual inspection.
Yeah.
So they randomly assigned them to 2 groups. One that was only going to use this rating scale that they developed, and one that was going to use the protocol that they developed. They presented them with 8 graphs, 4 reversal designs, 4 multiple baseline designs, and initially had everyone rate them using the rating scale, which was a 0 to 5 rating scale. Basically, it was 0. A score of 0 said it saw no basic effects. There was no functional relation, all the way up to 5.
Take your graph and go home.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is garbage. All the way up to 5, which was 3 basic effects, and does show functional relation with large behavioral change.
Nice.
Okay, so that was like the range there for that. So they had them all do that. And the graphs that they chose were from previously published literature. And they were ones that were, again, fairly complex. So the 3 authors of the study had all used the protocol they developed on them. And they had some disagreement.
Sure.
On them.
I like that they pointed that out, right?
Yeah.
That makes me feel good about their honesty.
Right. So they had the same level of disagreement that I did with them.
Okay.
So,
that's nice.
Props to me, I guess. So the group that just did the rating scale, they just did that rating scale, and then that rating scale again, the 0 to 5. But then the protocol group did the rating scale, and then they got the protocol, which was like the thing I just described where they said yes, no, they got the weighted score, etc. And then they did that. And then they just compared how did they do on those 2. And in order to compare this, they had to use this like kind of fancy kind of IOA. And I'm basically going to leave it at that, guys, to be honest with you. It was called the ICC, the Intra-Class Correlation Coefficient.
Were you familiar with this prior to reading this?
I was not.
Okay.
I read it in Campbell and Stanley.
Oh, fair enough.
So I have read it before.
Fair enough, yeah.
Katie Wolfe, stop making me feel like a dum-dum. I don't appreciate it.
No, but that one's not as well known. In the Campbell and Stanley book, it's like a little white book about design, and that one does give you some obscure things in there.
Because the point here is it's not as though there is a solid answer that everyone should be comparing themselves toward, right? It's only how well did all of these people seem to agree on what they did, and can we sort of hope that the fact that they all agreed means that we have something good going on here?
Right. I love that.
So it's like a truth by agreement thing, which philosophically has its weaknesses.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about this type of rating system, that's all you kind of have to go on.
Right.
Right? So that's what they did. So they looked to see like how much agreement was there within each group using the rating scale versus the protocol. And what they found is that for the rating scale group, they had like moderate agreement amongst the group both times they did the rating scale. And then for the group they got the protocol, their agreement amongst themselves increased greatly when they got the protocol, indicating that that's likely a much more precise measure.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's kind of what we can take away from that.
And I love that they make that available for you.
Oh my God, I know. It's really great. Like everyone should go check it out.
Yeah. Even just reading it through, it felt like such a nice refresher of, oh, wait, I need to pay attention to, some of these components, things that you look at and you're like, hey, I want to see this pattern, but maybe I'm not naming it or I'm not quantifying it. I think with the overlap, looking at overlap, I tend to be just visually be like, no overlap, a little bit of overlap, but
right. They
I
were
don't
saying,
tend
is
to
there
quantify
30%
it.
or less
Yeah,
overlap?
I don't tend to do that level of analysis, visual analysis. But that is a good point. I think that where we are as a field is spending a little bit more time quantifying those components. And it's a very easy quantification. It's not something that's very hard to do, certainly.
Yeah. They did do another level of attempt at sort of validity for what they were doing, and that they brought in a group of quote unquote experts to look to see.
Would you guys be considered experts in their definition?
I don't think so. Nope.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You know, we're cusp experts, I guess one might say.
When's someone going to write the article about the BCBADs who also host a regularly occurring podcast experts?
There's, that's a very small group.
It's
very elite.
It's the group I want to hear from.
So what they found there is that, the ratings between the protocol group from their study and the experts were pretty good. But the experts did rate the graphs more conservatively regarding experimental control than the other group did. But that, sort of goes to show, I guess. And then they did note that although they didn't mean to pick graphs that didn't demonstrate experimental control or functional control, 6 out of 8 of them, according to their own criterion, did not. So there is room for additional research here to look at more graphs that do demonstrate experimental control to confirm that this type of protocol will also reflect that. Although I think they picked the harder one of the two, but that might be an area for additional research that could happen here. I mean, the takeaway, it's still subjective, right? But at least it lays out some of the points in a more objective and quantifiable way that experts are using to determine if single case design data display is showing experimental control. And we're getting a little bit closer to something that someone else might view as more objective.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Diana. Let's, Jackie, move over to you, and you'll be discussing the Falligan article, which I usually look at how much I highlighted an article as a reflection, sort of an inverse of the less I highlight, the more I understood it. And the more I highlight, the less I understood it. Pretty sure I highlighted every word in this article. So I really hope you can give me some clarity here.
Yeah, so I don't think the article in itself was actually that hard. It's only 10 pages, and 2 pages of that are references. So it's not it's not very long. Right.
25% of it.
Right.
Oh, no. I don't think it's
I don't
even
even
right
know
math.
but that's fine.
20% of it is references.
Right. So it's not very long, but I think it'll be hard because there's math, right? Math is involved.
No, thank you. That's enough from you today. Thank you.
Right. And I think sometimes math is can be scary, but it doesn't have to be, right? And so we talked about why math might be helpful in visual analysis and visual inspection, because it can give us this more objective way of looking at whether data really do show an effect or don't. So they looked at 2 ways to look at visual analysis. One is called the dual criteria. They used the acronym DC. And so here what they did is they calculated the mean of the data, right? And then they calculated the trend lines. They did this for baseline data. And they extended the mean and the trend lines over the subsequent data path and phases to see where data fell in line with the mean and the trend lines. So really, that's all they're doing.
I know. This just gives me flashbacks to finding the area under the curve.
Right? So then they just look at the number of points in successive data paths that fall above or below both of the lines, and they look at a cutoff that they've determined based on the binomial distribution.
Sure thing.
Right?
Which is the bell curve.
Right. Yeah. So just looking at standard deviation, right? So they used a 0.05, but you wouldn't have to. You could, again, it's just math, but it just gives you...
So either more stringent or less stringent, depending on what you're going to allow underneath your curve.
Yeah. So the more stringent was actually the dual conservative criteria. So this is the exact same thing, except the mean and the trend lines are increased or decreased by 0.25 standard deviations. So it just makes it smaller, right? Where data can hang.
364 on birthdays.
Yeah, where the data can hang is just in less spaces. Right? And so really what they're looking at is seeing where you would get false positives. And a false positive...
Griffin loves the false positives.
Yeah, he does.
Yes.
So the false positive, all that means is that there was a change in a DV when the IV was not introduced. Right?
Okay.
That's all that means. Is that you would look and say, oh, maybe baseline is increasing when it wasn't supposed to, right? So it's just saying that, it looks like from the data the DV has changed, but the IV hasn't even been part of it yet. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So what previous research has found is that both of these methods, the DC and the DCC.
I really wish they had 2 different acronyms that varied by more than a letter.
I like it because there's really not that much of a difference. I like it.
No, I understand there's not much of a difference, but it is already a complex topic.
Sure. So what they've showed is that both these methods are helpful to determining whether a functional relation exists or whether there is a false positive or not with simulated data and published data sets. So fake data and then data that had already been published in the literature. But there's an implicit, I think, limitation there because simulated data sets are fake, right? And published data sets usually show a robust effect because they got published.
Right.
Right? So you
Where's
need
the
to look
Journal
at some
of Garbage
file drawer
Research?
data.
Yeah. So that's what they wanted to do. That was the purpose of their study, was to replicate a previous study by Lanovaz. I probably said that wrong.
Oh, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Et al. In 2017 to actually use consecutive controlled case series. So any set of data that they came up with in their filing that they used, right? So they didn't discount anything. And so they really wanted to look at where there was a low probability of false positives, a high probability of false positives. And what they do is they look at separating the baseline levels into part A and part B, and then just looking where the trend lines and the mean lines are, right? To see if data fall below or above that. So it's really not that difficult.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah, super fun. Yeah, and then another cool thing that I love that they did is that they further dug deep into the data and looked at it across function. So data that were attention maintained, escape maintained, tangibly maintained, or idiosyncratic.
Is it all FA data?
It was all, FA-ish data. Yep. And so, they did do something that the previous study did, is that they only used case series that had a minimum of 6 data points in the baseline. So that's what previous research did for the publication purposes. That's what they did here. So they saw 30 out of 69 cases that they looked at over a couple years. The minimum of 6 data points. They had 36 initial baseline series because some of the participants had multiple baselines for multiple behaviors, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So 13 of those were escape maintained behavior, 9 were attention maintained behavior, 10 were tangible, and 4 were idiosyncratic, and they gave the example access to rituals there, so highly specific.
Yes.
So for each case, they said they extracted the data from the initial baseline phase into Excel and cut the baseline phase into a variety of different phase A and phase B.
Mm-hmm.
But they cut it differently each time to look at where you were more likely to see a false positive.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So this part confused me, and I looked at it 1,000 times, and now I get it.
All right. Lay it on us.
Right? So they looked at data series that contain between 6 and 12 data points. So this is the example that they gave. For an example, an original baseline phase that contained 10 points produced 5 6-point data series. I was like, what? But it's just session numbers.
Right, because you can divide it up 5 different ways.
But it got me very confused.
Sure.
I literally looked at this for 100 years.
It's like that little visual puzzle. It's like how many squares are in this.
Yeah, I can't
drawing.
do those. I can't do
love those.
Yeah, so this was
It's always
very
more
hard.
than you think.
Right.
Yes.
So here they broke it up. The first example was they had 5 6-point data series. So they had session 1 through 6 in one, 2 through 7 in the other.
I'm on
3
board.
through 8,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes a lot more sense. And they just separated them into 2 so that they could look at them.
Okay.
Phase A and phase B. So then they put a phase line in between the 2, but the data always hung together. So 1 and 2 were always next to each other. 2 and 3 were always next to each other.
I would hope
right?
so.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
They made a point to say they didn't separate the data. They were so friendly that way. They just put a phase line, and then the program on Excel, so they used Excel 2016, calculated the mean and trend lines for each data set.
Yep.
I would have loved, in their supplement material, they didn't kind of have those mathematical equations.
Oh, yeah.
I would have liked that.
Right. Well,
But I probably should know them.
hard to do.
They're not.
Yeah.
But I still would have liked that.
Okay.
So they didn't do it by hand. They did it through Excel. And then they looked at a false positive if all of the data points fell below the mean. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So then they looked at the calculation of proportion of false positives by the data sets by doing the number of false positives divided by the total number of data sets for each DC and DCC comparison.
Okay.
So that's what the graphs are looking at.
Yeah.
The proportion of false positives.
Okay.
And if you look at the graphs, you're like, no. Because I think this
Girl,
is,
no.
I think this is another place where it gets a little scary, but it's not actually that scary. So they're error graphs.
They're box and whisker plots
with error, with the error lines. So on the left-hand side is looking at it with the DC method, right? The dual criteria method. And on the right side is the CDC method, conservative dual criterion method, right? And then they just look at if the top graph is if A has 3 points, and then the bottom is the number of data points in path B. So in phase A, do you have 3 data points? The second kind of line of graphs is if A had 4 data points, 5 data points, and 6 data points, and looking how many data points are in B, right? So phase A is first.
Yeah.
Phase B is second. So they're looking, okay, the first one, the DC method, you have 3 data points in A, and then you can look at 3 data points in B, 4 data points in B.
Yeah. So a false positive would be if you move to treatment when you shouldn't have?
False positive is that it shows that there's an effect when there isn't.
Okay.
That you haven't moved to treatment yet, but baseline is showing an effect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you don't want that.
Right.
Right. You don't want a false positive.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at the graph, you want your little bar, your little whisper box, to be close to their criterion line.
Right.
So the little line is the dot. So the closer you are to the line, the better you are that you're not going to see false positives. That's really all it is. And the second graph, figure 2, is the same, except that it's looking at the function of the behavior.
Okay.
Across attention, escape, and tangible. Same layout, though. 3, 4, 5, 6 for the A phase, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the B phase. So cool. So not that bad. Not horrible, but not great. Right, because it's just different than what we've looked at
Well,
before.
yeah. So what's the takeaway?
So the takeaway is that they found that the proportion of false positive decreased as the length of the B phase increased, but had no effect for A.
Mm-hmm.
So if A started at 3 and ended at 6, they showed similar results.
Mm-hmm.
But if B started at 3 and ended at 6, the closer you got to session 6, the more data points that you have in treatment, the less likely you are to see a false positive. That's all that they say. And so when you're looking at the less stringent criteria method, they said that no fewer than 4 data points should be in baseline. Phase A and B should contain 3 to 4 data points to minimize false positives. And with the most criterion method, they said that demonstrated less false positives overall. So if you're really worried about a false positive, use this more stringent method. And there's always better when there's more data points in the phase B, right? So, and then when they looked at the function, they didn't see any significant differences when observed in the data points, but they did when they looked at false positives as related to the function, which is fascinating.
Huh.
Right? So what they found is that the mean false positives were always lowest, no matter the A or B length, using escape maintain problem behavior, and higher in attention and tangible. And so they were like, why could that be? It might be, one reason that the authors suggest is that, with the escape FA condition, there's pretty salient cues, right?
Yeah.
You're like, you don't have to do this, and things are removed. Whereas with the attention condition, there's a little less salient cues. But they do posit that the tangible condition does have fairly salient cues, right? You have problem behavior, you get what you want. But they also said that it's possible that losing something may be more aversive than encountering an aversive event, right? So,
yeah,
I agree.
Right.
Right.
And I think that if you're using like a traditional control condition, then that can be less discriminable from an attention condition at times.
Right.
So it's not continuous attention.
Yes.
Right.
And so they said MOs for avoidance may be more stable and harder to satiate than the reinforcer-based MOs, and it may be potentially more aversive for the loss of an appetitive stimulus than the presentation of a punisher stimulus. So that may be why the escape maintain problem behavior sees overall less false positives because it's more stable. The data are more stable.
Okay.
So that's interesting. But it does show a good generality for the use of the DC and the, CDC or DCC, however you're going to talk about it, because it used clinical findings instead of the published literature. So their takeaway point, that their golden nugget is that based on these two criteria methods, in order to minimize the likelihood of seeing a false positive in your treatment, you should have a minimum of 3 data points in baseline and 5 in treatment.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like that take home.
Yeah. And then one thing that they said that we should do is look at research that doesn't have a total of 6 data points in baseline, because that's, like we talked about earlier, not that feasible in clinical settings, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't usually have that many data points. We usually have 3 or 2 or 1, right? Or we're like, screw baseline. Let's just go to treatment. So that's one of the things that they'd want to do in future studies. So I think it's, it's different than what we've looked at traditionally, right, in behavior analysis, because it does deal with a lot of math and proportions. But I do think it shows a good lens into how we may be able to look more critically at data objectively and give a rule to clinicians. So maybe they don't always have to do this, right? They don't always have to draw the trend lines and draw the mean lines. But if we can say generally just have 3 data points in baseline, 5 in treatment, then you might be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like that. But maybe we should be drawing the trend lines too.
All right. Well, seems like a good place to bring it all on home with a move into dissemination station. So,
such a fast train.
Yeah, I'm moving fast today.
So the big question that we're faced with in today's topic is going to be not so much, is visual inspection good or bad? Because we already talked about some of the pros and cons. And I think for our field to give up on what has made so much of our research
No.
work,
Wrong.
That's not going to be the component. It's more a matter of what are the pitfalls in visual inspection? And even more important, how can we dodge those? And then what training can we provide for future generations of behavior analysts so that some of these questions become moot in the future? Those are the questions I'm asking all of you. I can answer as well, but as I already said, you're the smarty pantses here, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
In reading these articles, it was highlighted for me how critically important it is that we continue to establish means by which experts can agree on their methods of visual inspection, and that we are properly taking the time to train new BCBAs in visual inspection.
Mm-hmm.
Because whether you're a researcher or a clinician, you should still be using visual inspection during your day-to-day, right? That's what we hang our hat on, is that we say we're going to take data on this, and then we're going to use those data to guide our clinical decisions, right? And if you're not doing that, that's problematic. And if you don't know how to properly read those graphs, that's also problematic because data aren't always pretty.
No. Sometimes they're very
Real
messy.
life clinical data don't look like they do in the research journals, right? They are messy, and there's a lot of up and downs, and there's a lot of additional confounds. And if we're not properly preparing people for how to look at those, how to pull out what might be extra noise, right? And how to determine really when it's time to make a change, and how to determine if those changes that you made are effective, then we haven't properly done our job as, supervisors or professors or whatever our role might be. So I really think that there's additional room in our field to stand behind single case design, because I do think that it's critically important to the underpinnings of why we do what we do, but also continue to move forward in how we're going to sort of justify single case design to an external audience, right? So continue to develop our internal validity with regard to what we consider to be effective, so that we can share that with others and demonstrate that this is a meaningful method of data critique. And then properly train people to do that. Because I don't know that that's always a focus.
I don't think it is.
And it should be.
Yeah.
I'm going to use Wolfe's protocols moving forward. I'm going to give them to my students.
I love it.
And I love them. Too. Oh, and the other thing I didn't mention is please, Dr. Katie Wolfe, can you go back and make one to be online for reversal withdrawal design based on Hagopian's protocol? I would love to have them all located in one place and have them be interactive in that way.
Oh, that would
Please,
be so
Katie
nice.
Wolfe, thank you.
We'll email you, Katie, too. Dr. Wolfe.
That's it.
I think reviewing these articles was a nice refresher of a skill that, as much as I would like to think based on how often I use it, it had become so fluent, is a good reminder of what are the underpinnings of that fluency.
Mm-hmm.
And while it is good to have fluency in a skill, that is not always the same as having the ability to describe what one is doing to be fluent in that skill. And that perhaps some of that fluency might not be quite as precise as I thought it was, which I think as a practitioner is always very important to do, to come back to the research.
Mm-hmm.
And also, again, to point to the reality of just because we have been able to be trained in the settings that we have been trained in for our field to grow, we are not going to always have our trainees and supervisees be able to be trained at very specific high research institutions. People are going to be learning how to be behavior analysts out in the field. And the more we have standardized practices, the better the chance that everyone is using these skills correctly, rather than hoping that enough dissemination has occurred. And as we've heard from many other folks in the field, that there's a lot of dissemination, but the spread of dissemination is not as high as the need of more behavior analysts out there really is. And sorry, Diana, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is something that can and should be accessible to everyone.
It's not an impossibility at all.
So
this is
more a matter,
low-hanging fruit
of us as a field developing some guidelines regarding this that are moving beyond what we've been doing, which is sort of like, yeah, we all know when something's effective, and we're all just going to have this, sort of gentleman's handshake agreement regarding what that is, but putting it into more objective terms and then disseminating those to everyone. It's totally doable.
No, this isn't the first set of articles that looked at like, hey, what if we do exactly this? And here I wrote it out for you. But as much as I think we're seeing more and more of those articles being written, the more they get written, I think the more we can reflect and say, you know what? We probably need one of those for this topic or that topic or that topic. And I've never heard anyone be frustrated or upset. Like, well, people just understood basic principles. They didn't understand any of this. Because I think there's an understanding that as much as it would be great if everybody just had such a thorough understanding of basic principles that they didn't need some sort of a step-by-step guide, the reality is there are too many people who need to be trained in this science to ensure the level of training and oversight and study and research methodology exists. I just don't know if one could keep up with the need for actual folks just doing behavior analysis on a day-to-day basis if that were the gold standard and that were the only standard. We do need sort of the manualization and the standardization and the simplification of some of that training.
Word,
you got that.
Thank you. Future directions, I guess, would really just be looking at, what are the methods and, continuing to look at that generality, continuing to look at what are the variables that are important for those of us who have already been trained in some of these methods. What are the variables that are most important for us to pay attention to? Just because we know what we're doing doesn't mean that we're not susceptible to very idiosyncratic variables potentially changing what we're looking for in visual inspection. So just being aware of that, but maybe more work in sort of what those specifically are so that we can have better red flags for ourselves. And then also in terms of, some of these standardization methodologies, which ones are the most efficient, the most effective, quickest to train, have the highest social validity.
I smell a research project coming on.
Yeah.
Sure. Always sounds good. It's a good episode if we've had at least one or two good research ideas, right? Any other final words?
I think we hit it, really.
No, I already sang the Alice in Wonderland song, so there's really nothing else to do.
All right. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of the episode. But before we go, let's make sure everyone hears that second secret code word. It is bandages. Bandages. Bandages.
Bandages.
It's like the hit old song from the late 2000s. Is
that the band Fun?
No, that would be Hot Hot Heat.
Oh, sorry. My bad.
Or just, the adhesive or the strip of cloth that you wrap around a wound. Bandages.
Can you use that in a sentence?
I would like to use these bandages on this terrible wilderness wound.
You already did. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Diana, for being here to talk all about visual inspection. Always fun to have our experts or near experts or whichever category you tend to be.
The unrepresented category.
The close to the top tier, I guess. I think you're A tier. You're A tier in my condition group.
Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome.
I'm A too.
And of course, we want to thank all of you listeners out there for listening to ABA Inside Track. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to leave us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. There are a lot of other ways that you can get in touch with us too. You certainly could find us on social media. We're on Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as ABA Inside Track. You can go to find these posted on our YouTube page, ABA Inside Track, with the YouTube subtitling feature. You can certainly go to our website as well, where the links to these articles are also posted at abainsidetrack.com. And of course, if you want to email us, just feel free to go right ahead and do that at abainsidetrack@gmail.com.
I would like to give a big thank you to Jim Carr for our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music.
I just saw a picture of him on the internet. He looks really friendly. Way to go, Kyle.
Way to go, Kyle. Daniel Thabit of Liquid Studios as our editor, and Hollis Irvin of the Sycamore Workshop as our graphic designer.
Go. So many good thank yous. It's nice to have friends. Well, anyway, with that fun, happy memory unrelated to much, let's end the show. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye now.